happy that Armina Pilav is here, and I think that we should really welcome her very strongly.
Shall I use microphone or not? What do you
Yeah.
This one is good.
This one? Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Armina for the invitation, and also, I mean, thank you all for being here, because there are so many people that I know, including my PhD mentor, Professor Marie Curie, who is from New School, from Marsis, who is also with us. That was total chance. And it's very nice to work with people and to talk about your work in front of the people that you know for a long time, and you are kind of trying to discuss and rediscuss your ideas and upgrade them and be able to do mistakes and learn new things and stuff like that. So I'm really happy to do it. About the title, Materiality and Methodology After Explosion and Destruction, I'm not sure why I chose this title. So for me it looked something that could be interesting and the lens to look through and go back to my work. And I have to tell you that in this case, but almost always, I take many different roles in relating to my work. So one of them is like academic researcher, the other one can be artist, one is architect, inhabitant of a group that is doing something that has nothing to do with the official, classification of the people. Like, for example, the film school for me is this kind of gathering that is independent from any other thing, let's say. Or for someone who experienced the war as well. So I have different roles in discussing what I'm doing, and it is about architectural and other materials that analyzes entanglements of war and unwar spaces during the siege of Sarajevo, but also introduce new cities like Mostar and partly Camp Alto in Venice that we are going to visit today. It's about what the adaptations and human relations within these spaces and new codes of knowledge that are formed to the civilian non-violent reaction to the military destruction of the city and everyday life. And I'm having these words that are like, or compositions that I'm going to discuss through my presentation. One of them is material mediation, survival body, unwar space. I think is quite important for me, and again, it's a bit also a new idea for me. And impermanent society is again something that I'm interested in recently, and I'm not sure how to define it, and we can also discuss about that. But impermanent society for me is the society that can exist by one or many people, or like 1 second, 2 hours, 1 day, 5 days, 1 month, 7. It depends on the situation. And what I'm feeling at the moment, and not only from my own experience, is that we are very impermanent all the time, but no one is talking about it. And what we are all the time struggling is to be stable, to get something fixed, and to put truth somewhere. But the situation how it is, to me, looks like a bit impossible actually. Like just given the fact that I, for example, have 2 passports, 3 addresses, and I don't know. But I'm sure in this room there are many people who have the same condition. So for me, this impermanency is kind of an important condition and something to think about. So proposed terms actually includes like spatial practices of the Bosnian citizens during the war, but also like I rely on the work of many different scholars, filmmakers and artists, and I will just mention a few of them. So it's Zoran Došner, architect from Sarajevo, Ledo Skuc, Isabel Stengers, philosopher, Judith Butler, Hortense Spillers, filmmakers like Avi Mograbi, Harun Farasky, and many others. And I would like to also, before I start, just show a few images that are maybe also in relation to what we were talking the other days. One is definitely on imagination, and I like to say it's related to my PhD image-making process, actually, not rather than the imagination. I was interested always in this process, how to make images. So I'm not sure if we have sound, but we don't need it because this video is translated. I will just tell you So this is surrealist top chart. In our countries it is famous like non-realistic, and it was produced in 90s, and the date that you see on the screen is a fictive date. This show is from 1991 maybe, I'm not sure really about the exact date, but these guys were doing like, maybe you could call it today fake news, or they would kind of set up different situations completely enacted that are talking about the future. So their how to say, shows were entitled like how Europe is looking at us, divided country, divided city, like really something that after 2-3 years and still it's still going on, happened to us. So exactly this piece is actually, I don't have sound, but you can read it, you know. So he, I don't know if you can read, but he is kind of
try to have sound.
yeah, but maybe he can.
I'm not sure if you will succeed. But yesterday we had the
Problems with that.
the problem with the HDMI connection and do you have sound?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we need sound.
Yeah, we do, but we cannot get it. It comes from the projector.
But I can also tell the story. It's quite simple, you know. In 90s they are putting the date that is 1995, so 5 years after, let's say, about Yugoslavia that's going to divide. But not only that, they also in this a computer made mistake, you know. It's like really. So they also divided the city already in 90s, and we were laughing a lot at these images and like ideas, and it was naturalistic for us is like some kind of, you know, at a certain point it becomes a state of mind, you know, people who live in ex-Yugoslavia or now something else. And then the other images that I want to show, yes. So the next one is the boy in the movie, children like any other during the war, that is kind of singing along the street like how joyous and horrible it is to live in this kind of condition. So it's not always disastrous, but it can also be interesting, productive, different things. I will show you some pictures of the time. And finally, the third picture is I visited Jonas Vidna in 2016, and my idea was just to talk with him about his experience after the World War II, and I showed him also like my research work in Sarajevo, and we spent like 2 hours in this. It was difficult because I think you also know he doesn't hear well, so to have an interview and to talk with him it's a challenge. So we also like draw and write questions. It was nice encounter. And we talk about many different things, but what he told me like in that moment is like today every city is in the war, and I was like, that it cannot be, you know, because we are all the time trying to avoid it, and for us, for the people who are living in the country and there are no bombs, they think, okay, we are just observers of war, so it's somewhere else, and I'm looking at it, and it's like a presentation or whatever. So I think it's also a good moment because I mentioned this war and unwar space, and I have very often these questions like, what do you mean by unwar space and why do you use that term? Well, some people also ask me, why don't you use Deboard? So I'm like, well, I'm more interested in unwar, and there is a reason for that, because I realized, I mean, it's not me who invented this, it's actually a person that most of you know. It's invented this. I learned about this term from Christopher Hitchcock. And also I met him in New York, Nicola introduced us, because I wanted to talk to him about this idea of unwar and undoing war, and how in his view, with the book Abolition of War and through his work as well, what does he think about militarized society and how we can undo these images. And we had a long conversation. I also have this text with me, it's a very short text, so it was published in Harvard Magazine in 2016, the end of 2016, so you can read this very short text. And I will not read, but you can also do it yourself. So Christoph is proposing that unwar is the new state of mind that enables the process of understanding, uncovering, and undoing war. And then in the text he also criticizes our own practices. When I say our own practice, I'm talking about people who are doing research, art, architecture, any kind of production of knowledge, or relating different knowledges. And very often we are the one who are continuing the war with our own work. So we use often very like military strategies, or I mean there's nothing wrong in that, but we should maybe use them and rethink them, or acknowledge that these certain moves were learned from the military. As we saw in other presentations also, they mentioned, a lot of people mentioned. So, relying on his text and my own research, I realized that we cannot study war without knowing about the war. So it's like contradictorial, and also Sarajevo is kind of good case study because the amount of time that passed, so it's 20 years, also allows me to look at this space as experimental space. But not only the space of like killing and trauma, and but something that produces different spatial relations and different, like, how to say, ideas about the space and ephemerality and survival and stuff like that. And I see all these projects as examples of war as projects of oppositions to the military production, and the spaces in between military and civilian space, let's say. And I have to say that military power during the war is more visible than citizens' power, and this is also thanks to media representation that are all the time putting in public space like images that are completely disastrous, like raids on the street and a lot of blood, and it's very rare that they show how citizens are actually reacting to military construction and deconstructing this, let's say, the process. You can learn it in documentary films, but media images are very, very violent, as the war is actually, but yeah. So finally I would like to show you what happened in Sarajevo and how the terms that I told you, like material mediation, survival body, or unborn spaces and impermanent society are happening. So this is these following photos are from the demonstrations that are from March and April 1992, when the Bosnia was on referendum. The citizens decided for the independence from ex-Yugoslavia, but somehow, politically speaking, that was not accepted from everyone, and then they call them peace demonstrations, took place like both in March and April, and they are kind of marked as the beginning of our war. So in first three photos you see like many people gathered, like in the whole city, and the city like not so big, but it's 10 kilometers long, more or less. So the people would be around and protesting and even occupying parliament, and it was like very, very, how to say, like interesting social gathering at the end. But then in April, what happened, snipers started to shoot at the people. These are the images from the same location that I'm showing you, from like this enthusiastic and naive idea that we can, with our bodies, stop the war. And for me, these images also represent the moment when bodies of inhabitants start to change, because you see here they are like bending, they are kind of trying to avoid sniper shooting, and some people died actually in this very beginning. And so even if everyone like said, okay, we don't want war, the city in beginning of May in 1992, there are exact days on the internet if you want to know when it really happened. It's easy to find. That's not my focus now. Actually was besieged by Serbian forces, and before I show you the Sarajevo siege map, I want to show you how the city actually is organized. Like it's a city in the valley, surrounded by the mountains. In '84 we had Olympic Games, and you know there were many metaphors that were talking about this moment as a magic circle, as the perfect place to have both sport and leisure. You could go around very easily, and also these images from Olympic Games kind of were always presented as our images for the better future, but not only for Bosnia, but also for all Yugoslavia. It was the first socialist country where, or communist, let's say, we had socialist communism, where the Olympic Games were organized, like first country of Eastern Bloc, so it was still time of division between East and West, like with this, many different metaphors, let's say. And did completely voluntarily. It was not such a big business as today, obviously. So, on the Sarajevo survival map by Fama, that's why I show these two maps. You can see really like this famous expression of the theater of the war. And the city was completely besieged, like you couldn't go anywhere. In 1993 they made a tunnel under the airport, but that tunnel is always presented as a place to take out like wounded people or bring in food, but also in these circumstances a lot of like obscure things happened, like black market, because everything stops, like electricity, gas, water. So the city started to reproduce itself, and this reproduction also came out from the debris and the ruins, let's say. So also inside the city there were some places that were kind of occupied, or the front line was also not only on the hills but also through the city. So I'm talking about contemporary war, like the war that is present all the time, and these are the images of from Serbian Ethics by Polish director Pavillion, where he's showing how close the tanks were to the city. So you could even see the people inside the houses from these positions, and you could really like influence their life in very horrible ways. So as a response to besiege, Bosnian like kind of permanent government at that time organized like defense, but also citizens at the same time tried to organize their life as a protective environment, and the whole the building started to change, and the life moved to above the ground, like first floor and underground spaces, and also like somehow the life of the citizens was mediated between weaponry and the city, like the land, the trees, the buildings, everything started to be related, you know, and you could not anymore say like, okay, this is the park, this is the public building, this is the functions, and also like images completely change. This is the detail from the Sarajevo survival map, and these are showing the crosses where you have to run because the sniper can kill you. So they would make this the sniper alley, and citizens were running a lot. Actually, it was like the time. There is also the book called Sarajevo Survival Guide, and it's made in a really strange way because it's a book that is a bit funny, but at the same time is telling how you cope with the disaster. And what do you do when you don't have water? What do you do when you don't have food? There are whole recipes, and it's also related, as I said to you, like this body reaction to the war. So this is one of the images that I like to show, this interplay of above the ground and underground city. And underground city was used more than above the ground city because above the ground city was really dangerous. And then people started together like in small places for the safest part of the apartment, and also the notion of property and citizenship completely changed. And also like war introduced new architecture and urban elements, one made by both destruction and the other ephemeral and temporary, as I said before, made by citizens or civil service units like trenches for the safe wall. And windows repair was done by UNHCR foil, like plastic foil. But this is very interesting because when the like really heavy bombing starts, the first thing that happens, the glass explodes, and it's really very, very loud and very unpleasant thing. And then you have this foil on your window, and then you don't see outside anymore. So your perception to the city changed completely. So you are always inside, and everything is happening there. So your imagination, the city and the space, it's coming from one room. So it's like really a strange condition to be in, let's say. And then parks were turned into urban gardens, and like really terraces also to the small gardens to produce vegetables and like salad, or these are one of examples of the sniper protection wall, but there are many other. And so it was like just to cast the view from the mountain to the city where people were walking. And here I would like to try to introduce this idea of mediation, material mediation. And this is the magazine that was produced during the war by architects. Only one number, they did it in 1993. And two of them, with this map of destruction, they write that architecture, whatever it may be, good or bad, expensive or cheap, representative or not, is material medium which more directly, with the exception of human mixing, and most convincingly reflects terrible war destruction consequences. And also, what is interesting to say, I also have a big fragment of the research on the role of the architect during the war and how our profession changed. So we are not trained to build a city for destruction or to represent the destruction. So it's really like, that's why I'm using a lot of media works to do that, like photos and films, and because there are no drawings that are kind of representing this very condition of destruction, even though I found some, I will show you, and it's very simple, like caricature, but still is saying something about that. And what happened also that people rescaled their homes for safety reasons and transformed the architectural program of typically modern dwelling into self-programmed spaces, all different from each other. We could never compare it. And this is also, there is one of the architects, Zoran Doshner, he took 100 square meters apartment and showed how this apartment changed it into the apartment during the war. So I always say, without these drawings, I could never discuss architecture and maybe cross-media research to understand the war changes, you know. Because Zoran's work actually helped me to say, okay, we are not just into doing evidences, but we are also into representing what happened in that very moment. As you can see, like the life, if you compare this image and this image, so let me take it longer. So the living room is the place where you keep your transportation, because public transport was cut off, so people made objects to transport wood, food, bicycles were used, water was carried in the plastic can, like
bucket.
Yeah, bucket. And then the room for sleeping is like one here. And it's interesting like how he draw the people also, like bit bended, like bit, you know, like kind of fatal. So we can also say amphibian position. So it also tells you about the scale. And in this room, it's like in the previous drawing, it's 2 persons, but then you are having like 5 places to sleep in this. So everything was kind of body-oriented, let's say. And also, Doshner drove all these objects that people made to light their houses, to heat the house, to do transportation. They were all kind of to collect rainwater because there was no water actually. To make all kind of, yeah, I mean you can call them. And he wrote a lot of text about this project, and in the text he called this war design object. So yeah, but we discussed a lot if it should be war or unwar design object. Like this is not a weapon, you know, it doesn't shoot. It's rather the container that has water or something that you need to live, you know. So, as you could see, like that brick was a medium used by civilians, individually or collectively, for a protective power that is in contrast to the military destructive power. And maybe it's also a good point that I show you a few things. That I go to survival body idea from this, because from this drawing and maybe this one, you could, I could actually could draw a ground to explain what I mean by that. So, personal, I found out through the research, but also my personal experience, the personal experiences of the war are all different, and everyone has his or her own story, how war started, what you did, what you didn't do, and how you cope with it. And also how you react to the noise, to internal displacement, to the lack of food. So our body abilities are all different, let's say. And the obvious way to categorize survival body is the soldier and the civilian. And I started recently to take soldier as a survival body because, for example, through Ali Mograbi movies, I understand that soldiers are also all the time in the survival mode, and they are against the other soldiers, and they are measuring their power through weapons, while the citizens are trying to survive from the soldiers, and it's a kind of another relationship of being like the survival body. And let's say that civilians in the war all the time kind of face the fear and uncertainty, and the body is changing. I said it many different times, but the body is changing constantly. This is one of these images that I told people are running a lot. This is one of these cross of the sniper. And in this running, or when some explosion or some horrible thing happen in the city, if you are the big group, you are copying each other. So you are kind of, if one is laying down, you are all doing that because it becomes more instinctive that you don't think so much. You are looking what other people are doing. So individual survival body becomes a collective survival body, and you, a lot of time you move together, you do everything together, and sometimes you will die together. So it's really, it's a complex, let's say, a complex relationship. And as the time goes, you learn the sounds of war. So your body learns the sounds. So you record, it's like a recording something different, and you, how to say, you know, when it's a siren for this, you know what is that siren meaning? Air bombs or land bombs. If the grenade is traveling, you know if it's traveling over your head, you say, okay, it's far away, so I can continue to walk. If it's kind of very strong sound, you are laying down immediately because it's going to fall next to you. So your body really like try to kind of absorb all this, how to say, war elements. So my professor also, he's not with us anymore, he was teaching history of architecture. He wrote a very nice text about this idea of open city that happened during the war. And open city happened because the bombs opened all the facades. You could enter in any house and you could kind of also inhabit any place. So as I said, the notion of citizenship and property completely changed. And people were marked by where they were taking humanitarian aid, so that was your address. And it was not necessarily your house, so the things were completely ephemeral in that sense. And the other professor of urban planning, she made this map. I have only this because she didn't do project, you know, it was more like thinking about, she proposed some kind of collective city, and as is written here, I don't know if you can see how to read, but I will read it, composed of several independent walls functioning both collectively and individually on the principle of system units. So recent war experience has proved that in catastrophic times, smaller urban units can function better and successfully fight various difficulties. I'm not sure what she was thinking about, but like for me, she really looked at the city in that time and drew like kind of small like, no, she doesn't really call it neighborhood, like she called it like, how to say, urban units, something like that. So it can be even smaller, let's say. And you don't see much of this, but I will just shortly show you how I use the research of Sarajevo. I somehow, I'm not teaching how to survive in the war or how to, but we are kind of studying with my students all kind of material that are most of the time visual. And they are translating these materials into some drawings that could be architectural, but not only. This is, for example, economical scheme. What was the economy of the war time? Like, for example, they take water canister and they draw the whole like production cycle coming from I don't know where, and then going to the house to bring the water. And now it's in the museum. So we kind of work on the museum collection that has to do with these objects of survival, and they took them as disobedient objects. I told to Nicola, and they gave an agency like what is important. How we can put these objects in the city now, what they can do actually. And the other one is, one girl is doing a project to explain to children how war changed the home. So she's making a dollhouse that is completely like transformable, and it represents like Zoran Doshner drawings of the house that goes from before the war to war. So she's showing like above the ground and underground space. And you can move everything, like walls, and then normal things become ruined and stuff like that. And finally, this one is on food production. It's like the cycle, how... And she drew this map from interviews. She listened to interviews of the people who were, I don't know, eating pigeons, they explain what was finding the meat, how you find the meat, gaila, and how you find the vegetables, like basic ingredients for the food. And finally, I want to pass this is a new research project for me, and it's Mostar. It's another city, it's south of Bosnia, and we call it. I'm not the only one. I have a research associate, partner, friend, whatever it is. He is archaeologist, Damir, and we call it narrative recollections, materiality of war, flowing memories, and living archive. And so Sarajevo was really based on, how to say, human, how things happen, and what we did, and how we use architecture, material, bombs, this and that. But for Neretva, we choose to start from the river, from Mostar. So we are starting from the river, and we are taking the river as archive of our research. And so we are asking questions to the river, and I also like wrote these questions because I'm going again after this experience. I'm going to Mostar to continue this research, and I wrote something like this: walking on your river banks, attracted by the contaminated greenish color of your water, listening to the sound of your water stream, looking at the shapes of the water flow, immersing my hands and foot in your cold water, I was trying myself to become a river. So it was a moment of looking for a relationship between you and me and all materials that you contain now. So deep inside me, I was asking you, I had some questions for you. Can you tell me how the rivers are born? How did you decide where to flow? If I will ever have a daughter, can I call her Neretva? How was and is your relationship with the humans, land, sky, air, your stream bed, and the underwater world? How do you archive human-made materials and other foreign bodies that are inhabiting you? How did war in Mostar start for you, and did it ever finish? So it's like strange relationship because we don't know how these questions are going to be replied, but maybe we do. We will try to do it. And how I started to look at the river as archive is with some keywords that are like open maps, spaces of shame, reappropriation of the city, like spatial hate of the space. How can you hate space to destroy it, actually? We had trauma and geotrauma, post-traumatic landscape, states of disruption, residual spaces, mental memory, and the living archive. And in this case, we take a trauma as a body. And as you can read in my reference, trauma for Armina is not a personal thing. So at the time of the Earth is recorded, accredited, not up inside us. So all human experience is an encrypted message from the land to the cosmos, the stream of the Earth, let's say. And how it all started is that I was with my students in Mostar in September, and I saw this concrete stuff on the river banks. And I asked one friend, what is this? And then he told me, well, during the war, since all bridges were destroyed on the river, they built temporary bridges. And many of them, not only one, because river would grow and would take them away. They were like kind of improvised structures. And even this one that has stone concrete pillars kind of was destroyed 2 times. And this is the image of one of this, the same one from the war. And this is actually the one that I also sent for the manual. For example, one of them, they told me, we did some interviews about the people who built them. They said that you could cross only one time and they would kind of collapse. So all these bridges somehow fall in the water, and some of these constructions are still there. So our idea is to do in July like underwater research, because the bridges are, now the water is low, and then it is very fast and cold river. So you cannot go there and do things whenever you want. It's very strong. The river is a strong identity, let's say. So, but why all this? And here comes this word of explosion, because in Mostar, the story is very strange, because when you talk to the people, they had 2 wars between 1992 and 1995. So the one war started with the Serbian army, the Yugoslavian National Army actually withdrew from the city, and they blew all bridges. So every bridge was made with an explosion, the place for explosives. So you put explosive, if you need, you explode it. So they did all of them in the same time, beside the old bridge. This bridge was destroyed in 1993, and then that was the moment when they had to do these temporary infrastructures. And even one man who was kind of participating in this building up of the bridge told me, I never took the bridge, I just swam the river. And we were like, okay. And it was always like open space, like when you cross the river, you could also die all the time, and it was kind of suspended space and interesting to think about today, let's say. So I would go back now to these methods or intentions or tools. What I did all the time since I was doing my PhD, I was interested in this cross-media analysis and use of all kinds of different materials, including human experience and not really precise information. Because I don't want to prove anything. You know. It's just I'm kind of interested in drawing different systems of living, you know, or understand different ways of living. And then trauma or traumas, it's also, for me, it's also like some kind of method, let's say. And how we can, because, for example, when you talk with the people who survived this or any other war, I've noticed that it's not only traumatic to be in the war, but it's also traumatic to tell about it. So it's something that you always have. And you also transfer it to the others. You know, you also transfer it to your child when you are pregnant. And it's like really something that is moving in our societies from always. That you know that Foucault in his book Society Must Be Defended is arguing that war never stopped when it started for the first time, and it's talking about really big, like our very remote past. And then in permanent society again is some kind of method of being together, and I can refer to here the things that I said before, but I can also refer to recent migration crisis and how people who are moving around the world are reinventing their spaces, being together, and yeah. Finally, we are in Venice, and this is the island where we are, where I'm thinking that we go today. And it's one of these islands that Angela Vettese was talking about, one of the defensive islands of the city. It was in this defensive battery, one of the 7 islands was the defensive battery of the city. And what is interesting, during it's like there since 18th century, let's say, shape changed, materials changed. During the Second World War was the island for the anti-aviation defense, that they would use it for that. Then in 1976 it was occupied by environmentalists who were protesting in many different islands that are related to environmental changes. So they kind of visited many islands, and the whole permanent project ended up in Sant'Erasmo. And somehow I think Isola de Campalto, and you will see today. Yeah, and after Second World War, I forget to say, it became like garbage island. So they would bring the Murano glass there, and if you, or like bricks that Angela Vettese was showing the other day, like these bricks on the other end. So there you don't have any construction. There are like a few small houses, but all these bricks and Murano glass is in the land of this island. And I really like to use this quote for the research on maybe swamp, maybe lagoon, maybe just Campo Alto, maybe Naretva. I'm not sure. It's something that I still have to think about with all of you and with many other people. And finally, methodological intentions for Campo Alto Island for me were some kind of taking minimal sections of the land and the single palm materials. Underwater archaeology, I asked my friend who is she's underwater archaeologist and she does research. But she told me, she wrote me a message this morning, there is nothing, they never did it, so I asked them. But they did some other researches in the lagoon. Maybe some collective real-time observation and listening of the space, so we are going there today and we can decide how we want to study this island, individually or together. Human body measuring of the island, that is not a new thing, it's Guillemina showed us yesterday the bridge in Cambridge that was made, this human measured space thing. And And then I also wanted to engage with the autistic people from Venice, because apparently autism is the capacity to be alone, to be independent and autosufficient. And I have a friend who is working with autistic people with the radio program. But we didn't manage because you have to, as they told us, you have to prepare them to work. We wanted to make some kind of interviews on the idea of being on an island for them and how they perceive not only Venice but also, like, generally speaking, Thailand as a space. So we didn't manage, but I asked Marco to come today with us to Kampala Island. So maybe I would make maybe a short interview when we are all together there, or he can talk about his experience in working with the people who are perceiving the space and work in a completely different way. And we usually don't include children, old people, autistic people. So I'm always interested in how we deal with all these topics that we are dealing also with the groups that are not in our, how to say, near presence. These are some photos from Campo Alto, and you can see the soil. Like, this is really like under the grass. I mean, since 15 years, they are kind of groups who are cleaning it, and there is vegetation, and when you are there, you would not think about this complex past and about all this strata that island is having, and a lot of organic and inorganic material at the same time. It looks like the normal green area. So we can. But when you walk around, what we did, we walked all island. It's not so big. We found different things, including this electric plug. So I really don't know how this thing can work when the water is up down. But can we plug something in this? We can try. I don't know, but it's also there. So. Okay, so the role of materiality, as you can see, is something really important. And somehow the all examples I show, for me, are creating some kind of material ecologies that we can always discuss. And for example, in case of Sarajevo, life in the city and human relations were highly influenced by presence of disintegrated materiality as a result of the bombing during the day and night, all the time. And it was always some kind of undefined space, if not only by danger, defined by fear, but the rest was completely, everything was possible. Defined by disorder, or undefined by disorder. And also certain urban wilderness, let's say, in dangerous but open cities. So a lot of contradictions, a lot of possibilities. And the experience of living in a city subject to military destruction affected citizens' ways of thinking about and interacting with existing materials. And I cannot believe, but I'm kind of finishing with Miller, who is quoting Hegel in his Phenomenology of the Spirit, suggests that there can be no fundamental separation between humanity and materiality, and that everything that we are and do arises out of the reflection upon ourselves, even by the mirror image of the processes by which we create form and are mirrored by the same process. So, yeah, we can, I don't want to conclude, it's very difficult to conclude, but it might be that everything is related.
So I have two questions.
Read this, I don't know.
So one is on the idea of unwar, which I find really fascinating and productive. I'm thinking about, because usually we tend to concept proceeds by prayer, so war is always opposed to peace. Well, I mean, at least in, say, the Western philosophical tradition, the position is always war or peace. So I wonder if there is we're breaking that dichotomy and we oppose war to non-war, which, as I said, I find very productive as an idea. I wonder whether there's also something like peace and and peace. And I wonder whether there's a way in which we can characterize, I don't know, for instance, Italy's current condition as one of peace. So that's, just to throw it out there. I'd like to hear your thoughts about it. And the other thing which I find extremely fascinating is the idea of trauma as a method. Again, towards the end of your talk with the reference to materiality and the Hegelian kind of understanding of it, it's very clear that for Hegel there's the break, which is the spirit, Geist, so which perpetrates the kind of humanism where humanity is the only thing that can really experience trauma, whereas it seems to me most of your work is about more than geo-trauma, like architectural trauma. And I don't know, I perceived the image that you have shown as a kind of building traumatism. And I wonder what is then, whether this, while using this idea of trauma as a method, you've come across some ways to not necessarily conceptualize or to think about, but let's say to handle somehow the difference between, let's say, building traumas, human traumas, animal traumas. There's a way in which, because then there's obviously the question of the healing from trauma, which is, I suppose...
It's also, in philosophy it's discussed a lot.
Yeah.
The healing process.
Yeah. But I guess that there has to be a different process according to the different materiality. So I don't think that humans are that special. I'm a Spinozist, ontologically speaking, but I do think that there's a capacity to speak, and that trauma is very often an interruption in that capacity of speaking. So there's something in the very process of being able to tell a story, which is therapeutic, and I wonder whether buildings have the same healing process, or whether...
I can try. Also how the question of peace, we witness it's just it's political to stop the war. But war doesn't stop by bombing. But once you have a war, you have it always, especially in the places that it happened. But somehow we are taught also when I was in my school, war ended and I was the first grade of high school. So I remember we would study peace accords in the history and how these things are done, but it's most of the time like big states, like presidents, powers, relationships to stop bombing, let's say. But peace is not really. I don't think it's not interesting at all for people who survived or who didn't survive the war, because we are, as I said, we are always thinking that if the war is somewhere else, we have nothing to do with that. But actually, we are all actors of every war in this world, because I can tell you a very simple example. It's like buying products. You know, I don't know, Coca-Cola, Nestle. They are all participating. I have a big list of the international companies, or like who are part of banks, are all keeping money for the arms trades. Arms trade is big business. War is a business, But I'm kind of, I find Sarajevo research almost as a I look more into the domesticity of war than into this big, idea of war or not war. And with Mostar, what we are doing, it's really new. It's just started like 2 months ago. We are kind of looking at the landscape, at the system of different materials that are more or less archiving the war now. It's again an archive, And when it comes to Italy, I'm not sure how, because I'm also partly Italian, I'm a naturalized Italian. You know, I lived here 8 years and I could never understand political relations. Really, I was always kind of, okay, can you explain me why this happened there, why things move there, and also like this new thing of closing reports, and I'm kind of following what is happening all the time, but I'm not able to understand, as I cannot understand politics in my own country because it's very complicated and always tool to complicate our lives, you know. But what we operate in a, I know Maretta said yesterday, the small scale is never, it's not so important as also, it's important as a big scale, like, okay, we have some small changes, but we could also think about big changes. So I'm not able to answer your question in a very precise way, as you can see, but peace is, in that sense I really like Foucault, how he explained that there is no peace, you know, and we should abandon it. And also, what each in his text, I have it here, I can give it to you or send it to you by email, it's just a mask, you know, it's something that kind of distracts you from, when you say peace, you think everything is fine, but actually it's not, because you are bringing all these things with you all the time. So, what was the second question? About architecture and trauma. This is also, again, I don't know if the system is a good word, but you always, I mean, what I'm doing, or with people that I'm working with, we deal with that on individual, like I'm talking to you about, you know, trauma, and I'm telling you my own trauma. And then, together, you think about that and you try to understand what happened in certain place. And buildings, I'm not sure if you can really measure the trauma, but nature is better to see that, you know, because our mountains were mined during the war. It's really like big, it's an environmental disaster, you know. The river that I showed as well, it's full of these materials of war, but then when you reconstruct these things after the war, you always do monuments. So the bridge, I didn't show you this, but for example, this text, I wanted to tell you that I'm not the only one who is doing cross-media methods. This is the bridge of Mostar, that is the most famous image of this city. I didn't on purpose show it because it's like kind of, but this text is about, it's entitled How the Old Bridge Was Destroyed. And the man who wrote this text is the man who destroyed the bridge. So it's very strange. The book is in English and in Croatian, and he just was on the court in Den Haag, I don't know when was it, 6 months ago.
Something like
So he was kind of, his sentence was very heavy. I mean, he killed himself in the court on the TV.
During
Poison. Yeah, so that guy,
He drank poison. Yeah.
he drank poison.
It was the
And-
final
step.
part regarding Yugoslavia trial.
So what he did in this document, he analyzed the destruction of the bridge as done by the explosive, not by the tank. So I will show you how he draw everything, he takes film and images to show how this thing happened, you know. And you know, when you are in the city, Mostar is a very small city, so you can see everything from very short distances. So I want to just, it's a very strange document, you know, like, but I mean, he was an educated guy. He was like dealing with film critics and philosophy, but he used these methods that we are kind of using to research trauma and more to prove different things. So you see here, so he's kind of using TV images to say, okay, this, I didn't do it, or it happened in a different way. And he did experiments, like schemes, I don't know if you can read. He was kind of trying to prove that detonation was done by explosive from the bridge. And he also did experiments himself to show the tiny destruction, you know, everything. So it's, you know, like methods are important, let's say methods, tools, or we can call it intentions, whatever you want, it doesn't matter. But they are used by our enemies, by us in the same way, you know. Yeah.
I would like to ask as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
To pick up on that, I think it's like super fascinating that, well, at least how I read, you kind of put in parallel bodily experience and spatial experiences, or like places and locations and space experience. And like, not be cautious, like personally, like coming from Lithuania, I think many of us here sitting have also these kind of memories from like, you know, these political situations and like in gaining the independence with all the sounds and, you know, moments that you point out. But also like recently one of my students, we worked on the post-war Damascus, and we discussed a lot this situation as he had ambition to develop a typology, you know, like sort of for, so to say, popularly called revitalizing the city, right? The sort of the difficulty in there, how to work with the war and the material of the war without fetishizing that. And my question maybe would be, what would be your take on like traces and memory, and like how do you productively or constructively deploy this material, and if you believe in the possibility of that at all?
When I'm working with someone, doesn't matter, my students or people, on the concept of remembering and memory, for me that's performative. There is no project there. It's something that we talk about.
So you don't believe in materializing it in any sort of cityscape or...
Whenever you materialize it, then you are always excluding something. It's for me, I mean, I never deal with this memory thing because I was not able to do it. For me it was too or you have to take a side. What side do you want me to take? I want to take human side. Why I should be, you know, why don't we discuss our disasters from the human and natural, let's say, like a global, how to say, landscape perspective, whatever it is. So,
but you draw references from the physical remains, not just from the conversation, right? Like what we are confronted here is with the physical, like realities of this bridge, or with also with the river, you know, with the remains of the bridges. So in a way, like what I really was fascinated when we talked about that relationship between like physicality of the body and like reactions and relationships of processes, which is this big picture, and then it results in new designs of the equipment, which is not necessarily is the equipment for war, but it's for kind of life situations. So for also for these healing maybe moments, you know, like for actually continuing life, or for life finding new forms.
Yeah, but these objects now, for example, they are in the museum, and you go there, it's really an exhibition, and they are there.
Yes, but is there, do you think there is a way of dealing with that, or for you it's not the...
Yeah, but I mean, Daniel and Chuck, the students of mine, they are kind of dealing with this, and I said to them, can you imagine this building, these things walking in the city, or give them some agency, or they speak to them? I don't know, I mean, it's something... Yeah, I don't think it's so definable. And memory thing is... Now there are many discussions on post-memory, post-monument, unfinished monument, non-monuments. I mean, not now, maybe last.
Oh, all post-Soviet countries like survive this.
It's a big topic, you know, and somehow... I don't think it's fair to play in one way. And okay, do it like this, because I think we should do it like this. Well, I mean, yeah.
My question, you know, as well a little bit. You know, I discussed with many Armenians and Azerbaijanians about Mountain Karabakh. It happened, their conflict maybe approximately now it's about more than 30 years ago. And later about, it's okay, Sarajevo, it's approximately now it's 27 years ago. Then I participated in a little bit discussion between Ukrainians and Russians in Donbassian region, you know. And they discussed about what does mean this post-war period or ceasefire period, which you call on-war. And they as well do comparative analysis of different conflicts. And now they more or less agree that they need approximately time of 2 generations in order to come to some kind of peace. It means between war and peace it should exist 2 generations. What does mean 2 generations for our time? It's Moses, idea of the Jewish, escape from Egypt, 2 generations. In Moses' period, it was 40 years. Now, people consider that the 1 generation means 30 years. It means 2 generations, you need 60 years in order to come from the one condition to the another. If you apply this 60 years to South Korea, it exactly looks like this one. And 2 generations, 60 years means, what does it mean? It's for architecture and the memory. It means that originally when architects build or urbanist build city, he considers memory, processes, social processes, memory, heritage and everything. This period, it's very strange when you couldn't consider no one side, because there is no clearness what kind of ideology, mythology, history, heritage you need to develop per this 60 years. What does it mean for architecture, for architect to be outside of this one truth context of truth, because this untrust is present every time and everywhere. It's interesting for me, what kind of architecture, what does mean architecture in this sense, when you are not in the war, no in the peace, in some kind long-term ceasefire with hated communities.
Yeah. If was a comment, I hope it was not a question.
Which was the question?
Yeah. What does it mean? For example, something similar happened in Mostar. We interviewed a man who was using these bridges. We wanted to know how the infrastructure, because we want to redraw them. I really don't know, want to make some open maps. And when I asked all people the same question, when did your war start? And then he started to talk to me about 1993. So the one of 1992 for him was not war, when the old bridges were bombed. So he completely removed that time. And I was like, should I ask him again? Or then I said, no, that's his, how to say, perception of. So for him, the war was 1993, not 1992. Because I also had a break between, and they always say between 2 wars. But it's very short, this period. Like, why you should even remember that, or why you should locate your memory in this. Yeah, I don't know. It's a condition, let's say, and yeah. I didn't study a lot of Armenian cases. I was in Ukraine. I did some research there and in Kiev on war. We did some kind of. What we did in Kiev, we did collective lecture. Like, we all sit together and talk about war, and we posed some questions. And it came out that we were all the people from Turkey, from France, from Bosnia, from Ukraine, and it turned out that we all have some family stories that are related to different wars, and our public of the conference was participating in this conversation without knowing that we prepared a little bit our kind of performance on this, discussing war and un-war, and we took Christoph extra days to discuss this. And then when we asked the question, how many wars we did, one woman said, what are you talking? I didn't do any war. I'm like, are you sure? Well, yeah, the country who didn't. Well, maybe you both, as I told you before, so it's not, we tend to define, peace, war, battle, it's historical event always, but I think in a human time or a song time, it's not so easy to define these things. I would leave it more liquid, like more ephemeral. In both sense, in material and in immaterial sense, because Paul Murillo, for example, is talking a lot about immateriality of war, and for the immateriality of war are, satellites, weapons that you can, navigate, and he has very interesting books on, he wrote a lot about war, but still sometimes very defining a lot of things like this. Putting it in boxes, but still, it's nice how he writes about it.
Yes, I wanted to ask you
Yes, but I could ask you the same question. Yeah, and I mean, I put it there as a really open. I quoted because Freedman said it was not meaning, but for me, from that interview, it stayed. So we could also take this sentence and say, okay, today every city is in the unwar. And what do you do with that? Because if you say every city is in the war, it's kind of easy. Okay, there are many countries in the war, many cities in the war. But who is in the unwar? Who is undoing it among our environment? It's open. It's like open statement. Let's say. I don't know. What do you think? I'm curious.
I don't know. I remember you saying that the thing with that you have two passports, that everything is really unstable. And yesterday we also heard the activist of Silent Dogs said that everybody is while thinking they're successful artists moving around and doing many big projects, and that like roots, that we are like in constant fugitive, like constantly being chased around without knowing that we are.
I mean, I agree on this.
Okay, just like, I have a maybe final comment about this war in cities. There is a fantastic book written by Sharon Rothbard. Maybe you know him. It's an Israeli writer who writes about cities. He wrote the book Black City, White City, which was published by the MIT Press. But recently he also published a book which is about, but I don't remember the title, War in Our Neighborhoods. And he actually talks about neoliberal social and economic agreement. And he was like super precise about that, so you should check it out.
I will definitely continue. I'm collecting this whole literature and I don't know.
I just want to maybe pick up on like all responses in a way, the notion of generations, like 2 generations at least, but also condition of permanent war and non-war. There is a city in Croatia, Vukovar, that is like a monument of like Croatian suffering in the war. And right now, well, there's been a research, sociological research recently, done with children, and the results, or conclusions were quite very dramatic, because researchers realized that young generations, so generations that were born after the war, from parents who were in the war, and when I say parents, I mean people who were neighbors one day and the other day killing each other in one city, literally, because that what actually happened. So their children that never experienced the killing and destruction are more radical in their ideological and political positions than their parents. We are talking about amphibians here and ecologies. Their parents were amphibians in social sense. They experienced how it is to live with others. You know, they experienced society where there was no the other, where we were all the same, right? There was a social ecology in the city that was on the border. That was a border ecology. But after the war, you know, like younger generations that never experienced that type of social ecology, they just know the other, and they know the border, the invisible or visible, you know, tangible or intangible, and that exposition to the otherness or, you know, existence in that part of ecology is, you know, there was no that kind of experience for younger generations, and I'm referring to 2 generations that, you know, take place to erase the war, to unwar, Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe after 2 generations we will have another war, you know, that will be even more bloody than the previous one. Because it's not erasing the idea of war or war experiences, it's erasing of togetherness or the ecosystem that was before the war. So, you know, this is not an answer but a feedback to this continuous war, mobilization condition that reshapes ecologies, both social and natural, technological, urban ecologies.
Yeah.
Okay. Last. Maybe last.
I had just 2 comments rather than questions. Because I was like, while following your presentation, I was always reflecting on the question of materiality, which is important for you, as I presume. Because it's a very problematic concept, you know. You brought Paul Grillo, who problematizes it as well by introducing immateriality into the war, which is always both material and immaterial. And I thought maybe Malabou's concept of plasticity would be productive for you, because she really thinks of materiality by assuming the concept of trauma. For her, plasticity is both giving form, accepting form, and exploding form with their remains of memory. So you never, it's not the flexibility, but there is an element of wound, of accepting something, and that remains, the element of memory within the material. So, and in this way, you know, human brain and basically all the matters outside you, you know, the world, are the same. You know, they're plastic by accepting memories and by being exposed to this destruction. So, and this brings me to your research on the water, on rivers, and it has been a lot of work done in anthropology, also anthropology of imagination, if you want. Marie Curie, who wrote on river imaginations in indigenous communities in Amazonian, you know, basically tribes and other stuff. So I think it might be fruitful, because there is the whole, you know, in anthropology, the whole kind of direction of understanding the water as a tool of perceiving, containing, imagining, and whatever. You know, so basically, water is just something that structures the ontology, a specific ontology of your mindset. And there was something else.
Thank you. We also, I forgot to tell you, with this floating memory, we were kind of thinking, what if narrator bring away all this? Because we are talking about bad, there is the division between bad and good memories in memorial studies. When I was doing my PhD, I started with these things, but I couldn't find my way. You know, so I abandoned memory studies, but I took some
now that you told that, I remember last thing I wanted to say. I think maybe the most important. I think the concept that I was kind of like waiting for in your presentation, and which maybe provides all the problems also related to the question of generation, is the concept of justice, because which usually brings you to the problem of revenge. You know, so trauma is followed by the question of justice and revenge. And of course, we kind of speak of Derrida, Levinas, and whatever. You know, those people who did a lot of on questioning what is justice. You know, what's the concept of justice here? Is it symmetrical or asymmetrical? You know, can justice being done or undone? So I think it can be also fruitful for you to maybe you know, overcome the question of justice, because it's really dangerous, you know, to speak about justice. Yeah, because it brings you to the condition of convention of those radical people who never experience the war, children, but they want justice. You know?
Yeah, in that case, what we choose is this hate of the space.
Yeah.
Because we humans, we are very destructive. We are not interested in doing something good for our environment. We are all the time, we are too egoistic to be able to, you know, live it in peace, let's say, like in literal terms. You know. So what we choose, it's not like right to the city, spatial justice. We choose like hate to the city, hate to the space, hate to the river, hate to the environment.
Yes.
And when you kind of look at this capacity to hate that we have that. Many believe, you know, you transform hate or, yeah, what I like what you said the other day, don't take trauma or ask for help. It will look, not trauma, we were talking about the idea of having some bad feelings that will draw you in this asking help from someone. But it's not about that, it's more about transforming these feelings into, I'm not sure that we can transform hate into love, probably we can, but to talk about it or to discuss it.
My argument about new generations was not just about generations. If you check this whole text or Marie Curie, for example, it's about forgetfulness. It's not about trauma, it's not memory, it's about forgetfulness. And architecture, forgetfulness, how to forget. Ordinarily, this architecture looks very, very, it's like routine architecture. It's like after Kaliningrad architecture, it means architecture of forgetfulness, you know. How to forget that before the Königsberg with this high Prussian culture, you know, how to build all these new buildings in order not to remember nothing, but they didn't pay attention that they need to rebuild as well underground. They put new buildings on the old underground, and they started now to speak that this underground acts like subconscious city, you know. You are in the city, when you down to underground, you immediately see German, subconscious. It's Russian city with German subconscious. You know, but it's the question about forgetfulness, how to forget. They need 60 years to forget. What's after it, after this forgetfulness?
But it's not
But
just
it's not about
forgetfulness,
forgetting.
it's about it's about fiction of memory. You know?
Yes, because everybody would like to remember you, you know, send you messages. I would like to forget, but somebody sent me message. No, don't forget. You need to remember forever.
Some reminding. But no, I like that if you say like this, if you look at your activity as a therapy, then it became seek for help. And for me that was really good. When you said that, I was like, okay, I kind of, you know, I could identify my work with this, my work, some kind of idea, with this thing.
Well, maybe. I just want to say a short word in the form of gratefulness and thankfulness. To say that military technologies, as Armina brought here in her research on war, constantly renders invisible forms, right, through the remote sensing, remote viewing, dislocating, physically, bodies. Now through the robotics, through the drone technologies, sort of like withdrawing your physical presence from the war scene, from the battle. But it is very old technique, right? Like it is camouflaging, smoke screens, disguising, right? So these are the terms that are actually shared not only between the war generals, right? But it's also shared between the architects, right? And for us it is very important to acknowledge that the architecture tools, right, are being deployed, in the massive destructions. Modernist mind, was not only draining of the swamps, was also bombing the cities and creating new terrain for the future of the society, right? So, Corbusier, right? I think that he was the one who said that, the perfect city is a bomb city, right? So it opens sort of like the new platform, right?
Continuous destruction sometimes.
Yeah.
So in that sense, sort of like for us to analyze this architecture tools, its involvement in the destruction is also sort of like a process of decolonizing architecture, right? And I think that's why, when we're saying don't drain the swamp, it's also we want to bring the techniques of our work, right? So thank you, Armina. for your honesty.